Now for something completely different. Ella Frye, resident of Albreda, was British Columbia's first registered woman trapper and known as an all-round tough gal and crack shot who wouldn't think of going hunting for moose with more than 2 bullets.
Though Ella passed on in 1995, we're really lucky to have a short audio diary of her first days on the trapline.
Though many people knew her as a very tough wilderness survivalist, her first attempt at trapping didn't go so well.
Here is a tender story about a very tough lady.
And then I got down into the timbered country, and my brother was with me. He was going to show me the ropes. We made our first camping ground under a spruce tree, and it snowed all night. Next day we started out to go up on the line, and he told me it was only 7 miles to the first camping ground, so we started setting traps and we went on up, and the 7 miles seemed to me about 14, so we camped out again for the night. And I thought, well, this is kind of a tough way to make a living, but it's better than none. So then we went on the next day, and I got 2 blisters on the bottom of my foot. And he took his pocket knife and he opened them so they wouldn't hurt so bad. But by the time we got going again, I was pretty discouraged. And we didn't see many tracks of anything because everything was pretty well trapped out, being that the price of fur was dropping lower and lower all the time, and they had to catch more fur to keep people eating. And this was back in the hungry 30s when you didn't get very much for what you did produce. We continued on up to the next cabin, and on the way going up I played out, and he said, I'll go ahead to the cabin and I'll make a fire, and then I'll come back and take your pack and meet you. When he come back, I fell into a water hole, and I was sitting in there sleeping. And he said, what are you doing down in there? And I said, I don't know, but just leave me alone. You're going back to the cabin. And I'd fell in through a beaver dam, and there was some water there, and I was sitting in this water. And he said, come on, he said, get out of there. And he took the pack up and got me to take my snowshoes off and hand them up to him, and he pulled me out of the hole. It was starting to get dark then, so he took my pack and I followed him back up to the cabin, and he said, you'll be nice and warm, you'll be all right tomorrow. The first is always the worst. And I said, well, I don't know how it could be any worse than what it is. And we got to the cabin, and he said, I got some coffee brewed up there, you better have a drink. And I said, no, just let me next to the fire, that's all I want. And I curled up around the stove and went to sleep. We kept the fire going all night, and he didn't waken me up or anything, and the cabin was in pretty bad shape. There's porcupine quills all over and brush and stuff that the pack rats had brought in. But it still felt better than under a tree. So in the morning he dug me out from behind the stove. He said, get up on your feet. He said, you got to get going. And I said, I'm not going anywhere. He said, oh yes you are, you're going to be a trapper, you know, you remember that, don't you? And I said, well, I remember saying something about it, but I said, right now I think a bulldozer went over me and backed up. Oh, he said, that'll all be all straightened out, he said, by night. Mike told me next morning, he said, I'll give you an easy day, he said, and you can rest up a bit. He said, there's a shovel there out hanging on the tree. He said, you can get the snow away from the door. And he said, take that crosscut saw and go out and fall a dry tree and bring it in and cut it up for wood, so you, when you come back here, you'll have wood to burn. He said, you can't leave a cabin without any wood, and this will be your main stopping place. Mike stayed with me a couple more days and got me sorted out a little so I knew what I was doing. And then he said, well, he said, I got to go back and go to work now. He said, you're on your own, and remember, there's nobody to look after you. And remember, the river is the only enemy you got in the whole world here. So stay off of the ice. He said he'd run the traps on the way back and look after any fur that was in them and reset them. so I didn't have to go back down over the traps again, and I went on from there. And I got a big fish, and I was really pleased with myself. I got up the next morning and I really panicked. I thought, here I am all by myself, miles from nowhere, nobody to come near me, and I thought, well, I'm not sticking around here. So I got out my snowshoes and my pack and I took off. And I walked all the way from that cabin right down to the railroad track and on home. And I come in at 4 o'clock in the morning, and my mother said, where in the world do you come from? And I said, off the TRAPLINE. Where do you think? Well, she said, Mike just got back here today. I told her that I'd just come back to get some more food because I didn't think I had enough to last. I was getting brave about that time, and I wasn't going to be beat. So I turned around and I got some more food, and I went back up under the TRAPLINE, and I never panicked after that. I never left the line for any reason. For 45 years I stayed up there, and I was as contented as could be. I would come out in the spring of the year after the beaver season was open and go out to work someplace, and in the fall I'd take my food with a horse and go out and cut trail and get the food back up into the cabins. I built new cabins all the way, and the old cabins was falling down, and I was cutting trail, and I was happy and contented with what I was doing, and I just looked forward to it all the time, and every day was a new adventure.
It's remarkable to be able to share that experience today.
The project was in large part due to the Valemount Historic Society that has a wonderful archive of photos and audio to draw from.
The Valemount Historic Society and VCTV are interested in capturing your stories about early Valemount on film.
If you have stories to share about Valemount, please leave a message for Rajmi, the museum administrator, at 250-566-4225.